Hello, lovely
Perfect.
beings. I'm JJ Rose. And with me collaborating is the fantastical Alan Bishop, podcaster from If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything, and Master Alchemist. And if you don't know fully what that means, he's also a distiller.
Mhm.
Alan, thank you for being here
Absolutely.
with me. And
Yeah,
thank you
I'm going to
for
now start using fantastical in front of my name and everything.
yeah, I bequeath you with that now. So
Thank you.
So, on this episode three, the conclusion of my trilogy, my big trilogy, these big long episodes for the advanced. Today, we're going to be talking about people before people, race wars orchestrated by gods, and who or what are you worshiping? That's a lot, right? So,
It is. There are a lot of people that are immediately like, nope, done, out.
yep,
Don't want to hear it.
that's fine. And I do want to give a little PSA. If you are listening to this and you get severely triggered because something that is said really goes against your belief systems or what you've been taught, I would appreciate don't spread hate, just turn it off, go on to the next thing if it's not for you. But if it is something that you do want to continue listening to, feel free to pause and take a moment and sit with some of these concepts. Because for many of you, this is going to be the first time that you've ever heard some of these concepts. And I think it's extremely important for you to wrap your head around them and take your time with them. Because these are obviously things that Alan and I have, studied, thought about, understood for years. And so to us, it might almost sound flippant in the way that we discuss them, but it's simply because we have so much time with these and it makes sense to us. So, in all the previous episodes, I ended all of them by asking you what your concept of God was. And I'm going to start out with just a few things. So, Hinduism is the world's oldest religion, and it believed that Brahma made the world, and then other gods were quote unquote in charge of it. Krishna is much like a prophet of other religions, much akin to Jesus for today's world in Christianity. Ancient Egypt, much the same, until Pharaoh Akhenaten or Amenhotep IV came along and had everybody switch over to monotheism, which went over like a turd in a punch bowl. Um, Basically, when he came along as a ruler, he was trying to show the importance of ignoring the lesser gods, not worshiping them as much as the divine, the absolute creator. If you go into native clans, they all believe that there's a divine creator who made everything. And then there are other lesser gods who control other facets of life. Almost all native clans also have trickster beings who interfere with humans, typically to progress culture and help the people advance. Buddhism, believing all is connected and there's a divine creator of all, and we're all a part of that. And now is when we start branching off into the individual God worship, AKA what I like to lovingly call God power plays. So we have the Jewish faith, which has Yahweh. And my question to that is, why does God need a name? But okay. And this is the first where we see monotheism, sacrifice. Their God was better than the other gods. And for me, this begs the question, why are there even other gods that could even get close to the power of Yahweh if indeed Yahweh was the creator of these people and end all be all? So, Alan, I'm going to kick it over to you for a little bit. And we're going to discuss Yahweh for a bit before I get into some of the rest.
I presume that Yadabaoth would not be his preferred pronoun.
Well, I think it's important that you say both because both of those come up.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean the there's a lot of things that are buried in the Old Testament and the New Testament too. It's much more esoteric than people realize. And one thing that I do agree with most Christians on is that all the answers are there in their book, but they're not the answers that they're necessarily reading. You know, all the way from the very beginning, we created man in our image, implying multiple gods. And all throughout the Old Testament, there are multiple gods that are referenced, and there's clearly a distinction between the God of the Old Testament and the God of the New Testament. But
Oh,
more
yeah.
so than that, in the Old Testament, there is a distinction between the God that was the creator, the God who was the worksman or the craftsman, and then the God who has a little bit more pity on mankind, even in the Old Testament. There's three distinct beings happening already right there. There's also the idea that the way that everything in Genesis and creation reads, it reads as though something had already existed and it was wiped out and then rebuilt, and then even on the face of everything. And you think about the period when all of these things are happening and the Jewish populations in Egypt, of course, Yahweh, by most other standards, is going to be looked down upon as this desert, strange wilderness god that's also representative of the fires of the furnace. He was a smelting god as much as anything else, a warrior god. And the Egyptians, very much so, you will find that there is a lot of graffiti where other Egyptians were comparing God to basically Seth and making fun of him as the donkey-headed god, right? Because he was so lowly, the lowliest animal that there was. He's represented as a donkey, all the way down to a donkey with serpent's legs. So there's certainly a lot hidden within that Old Testament, some of which is what Christians and Jews believe, and some of which is very much not as such, but it's all descended from the Canaanites. There were a whole pantheon of gods, all the way down to God having a wife. Where's that at? That should be in there
Mhm.
somewhere, certainly. So I think that's probably a somewhat a good jumping off point. And of course, I have, my own belief about all those things as well. So.
Absolutely. And so when we go from the Jewish peoples and Yahweh, we then jump over to Christianity, right? Now, in Christianity, it's supposed to be monotheistic, but yet they have God divided up into three. But yet they have a physical representation of God, which I hear a lot of people say Jesus is God. Not the case, actually. He said he was the Son of Man, not God. That was very, very clear throughout the scripture. So I'm still a little confused why that's still getting messed up all these years later, but I digress. So, and then of course you have God, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And then we move a little forward in time and we have Islam and we have the Prophet Muhammad. Again, much like the biblical story of Jesus or that of Krishna, you have someone who comes down who is a either physical representation of God and or a prophet. Okay. So I tried to cover the large religions throughout time and their belief systems. And you can see before the Jewish faith came about, all the religions believed that there was one divine creator God that wasn't like on earth with everyone. It created everything, and then it had these lesser gods who took over different roles. Okay. And I feel like it's time, Ellen, we just rip off the band-aid. Okay.
Sure.
Because I've kind of had enough futzing around with this. I feel like I've done as good of a job as I possibly could in episode 1 and 2 in describing certain things that right now might not make total sense to the listener, but I promise you by the end of this, it will. So, the God of the Old Testament is not the creator God. Like Alan said, it's a false God. And if you want to go to scripture and say, where am I getting this? No, I'm not pulling this absolutely out of nowhere. You can look at John chapter 8, verses 23 through 45. Jesus is speaking with the Jewish people. In verse 44, he states, your father, the devil, and you want to carry out your father's desires. He was a murderer from the beginning not holding to the truth, for there is no truth in him. When he lies, he speaks his native language, for he is a liar and the father of lies. Yet because I tell you the truth, you do not believe me. Now, this is Jesus literally talking to another Jewish person,
Mhm.
telling them that basically their God is the devil.
Yes. Yeah. Well, yeah, 1,000,000%. No, and here's the way I always phrase it to people. So whenever I'm talking to someone, one of my Christian friends, and they go, "Well, I don't really understand what you believe." I say, "Well, then think of it as a question. What if I told you? What if God was not what you think it is, and it couldn't be what you think it is because you can't possibly think of what it is in your head, that it is word and thoughts and it is imbued within you, but that you can't pray to it, that you can't, it doesn't demand sacrifices because it's not like you in any way, shape, or form." And I am not a Gnostic nihilist, I will say that as well. So I don't believe that this is a prison the way that certain Gnostic groups would believe that it's a prison. Very much in between that Gnostic and that alchemical thing. So it is a gift to be here, and there are certain rules that we have to play by under those lesser gods while we are here. And I know this is already confusing for some people. I want to touch on one more thing that you already touched on here that most people don't think of. There's Father, Son, and Holy Ghost,
Spirit.
which sort of makes sense, but sort of doesn't. It
Mhm.
should probably be Father, Son, and Holy Mother, which is the Holy Ghost. And when they're referring to ghosts, they're referring to spirit, which is the one thing that we have that is from that higher realm, a realm above whatever heaven that you already imagine exists, or you already believe exists, or already is a creation of some craftsman like God that created the seven celestial spheres, and whatever little level exists just slightly above that. There's something beyond that, and that's where your spirit comes from, and that's where your spirit's meant to get back to.
And it's fascinating that you bring that up because I've been very, very open. And there's two Gnostic Gospels I would like everyone across the board to read. That is the Gospel of Thomas and the Gospel of Mary Magdalene. Those are extremely important to me. And as we go further into this, that will make more sense when Ellen and I go between our beliefs. And our beliefs actually do vary slightly,
Yeah.
but that's a great conversation. And another reason that we can have a discourse, we don't have to agree on everything, but being able to have a positive discourse is where we all should be able to be at in this world.
Mhm.
But in the Gospel of Thomas, there's actually a part where Jesus is talking to someone and he says, "You can hate my father and blaspheme him. You can blaspheme me and you can hate me, but you cannot blaspheme and hate the Holy Spirit."
Mhm.
And that just, you know, further goes to what you were saying with the Holy Trinity. The divine female is definitely left out of that. We call it the Holy Spirit. A lot of people don't fully comprehend and understand what that means. They know that they feel it at times, but we will get into that. I feel like we're going to go back to the beginning a little bit.
Mhm.
And Alan, if you don't
Back
mind,
back to zero.
yeah, let's go let's go back to Genesis, the beginning, because the
Before in the
majority of
beginning.
people, yeah, I mean, and especially because we are coming from, biblical backgrounds and Gnostic beliefs, I feel like the majority of people are coming from some sort of Abrahamic religion in listening to this and the importance thereof of trying to get this point across. So for me, rant time. Why would an all-powerful creator, okay, something who created absolutely everything, heaven, earth, every single creation down to the amoeba, man, all the animals, plants, entire planet, solar system, universe, etc., why would that creator being need to warn off Adam from eating of the tree of knowledge? And then when Adam actually does, after Eve, picks the apple, eats, and Adam eats it, then when that being comes back into the Garden of Eden, it has to ask Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" after they ate from the tree of knowledge. So it was very, very clear that eating from the tree of knowledge would make Adam and Eve like gods, or even more powerful than gods, which is again this whole systematic of control. We made you, don't eat from this tree, look, don't touch, that whole dichotomy, which is wonderful. And then they end up doing it, and then this god basically can't find them and has to ask them, where are you? First of all, that should be ticking in everyone's head. There's a systematic issue going on, right? And then when you look at the Old Testament in full, it's bloody, it's gory, it's not, a kid friendly story, if you will. But even with the Garden of Eden itself, it, when you go into Sumerian and Babylonian texts, Garden of Eden technically translates to what we would equate with as a zoo, like a confined area. So it was almost like a petri dish. We're going to make these things, we're going to keep them confined. We don't want them knowing anything. And we're going to keep them contained, and we're going to kind of grow them under our tutelage with us in control. And no, and then they had these four quote unquote angels at all four corners guarding the place so that they couldn't leave and get out until they ate from the tree of knowledge. And then they got the boot because basically the experiment is over. How do you feel about it? Like, I'm about to go
Well,
off, so I need a moment.
he also demands immediate worship from the get-go, and what kind of god can create all of these things and then demands worship almost as though that he's feeding off of such a thing, almost as though that there's something that we have that we got on accident that he wants back, and so he has to keep us in some sort of loop. And it's not in the Bible, but you can certainly think of things in old grimoires, so the greater and lesser keys of Solomon, about how they may have escaped the garden using the knowledge that they got from such tree to get by those angels. Maybe they weren't let loose, right? Maybe they escaped because they realized some things and they understood some things that God did not intend them to understand. Something changed. The dynamic changed pretty drastically.
Very drastically. So at this point, Adam and Eve have eaten from the tree of knowledge. They get the boot. They're out in the wilderness. And then basically God says, I'm going to make everywhere outside of this lush, beautiful, fertile place, desolate. So they're kind of
Bam, desert, die, enjoy.
exactly, thanks for worshiping me. Thanks for your tutelage. So, and off they go. They're wandering. Now they realize they're naked. And a lot of people think, oh, they're naked because they physically had no clothes on. But when you think of a higher minded, being naked is almost realizing what you truly are, and you're exposed,
Mm-hmm.
right? So if you went from spirit form and you don't fully comprehend that you're in a body, and all of a sudden you realize, oh my God, I'm in a body, like I'm mortal. And uh-oh. And now all
Yeah.
of a sudden you're wandering in the desert and you've got harsh climate. So they end up birthing the babies, right? They have Cain and Abel. And supposedly, remember, at this time, supposedly Adam and Eve are the only two people that have been made on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
So it's just them. They birth Cain and Abel. Cain and Abel go to give worship to God, and God accepts Abel's but doesn't like Cain's because he's picky. Because again, this makes total sense, right? With a divine creator being. And Cain gets mad and jealous, and then Cain kills Abel, and then Cain gets the boot now from whatever nomadic desert land that they're living in. And then Cain goes out and marries a woman from the land of Nod. Who the heck are the people from the land of Nod? If Adam and Eve, Cain and Abel are the only four people in existence made by this God, who are the people from the land of Nod? And Nod is not just like there's one woman roaming around, like it's a whole city.
Well,
And
and,
then,
and and don't forget about this too, JJ. So in the garden, of course, everybody knows the snake story and the serpent, and they don't realize again that divine feminine aspect. Nothing speaks to a god that doesn't have as much power as he claims that he has, as to say that the snake was now going to be legless and crawl across the ground as it always had in the first place. And as Cain moves out into the world and finds these other people, he's also cursed not to be able to farm because God created him in his image as a murderer, and he's now a craftsman and a builder. All he can do is build cities. That's his curse.
And that's interesting because we have the Canaanites that pop up a little bit later.
Mhm.
And we went over this in episode 2 a bit, where you have the descendants of Adam, and basically they all get tasked with, once they're of age and they marry, they basically get tasked with, you're going to go over here and you're going to rule here. Well, what are you ruling if you're supposedly the only people on the planet? But yet they're ruling all of these people, and they're building these great cities, and they're ruling over these people. They're ruling as gods, whether they're big G gods like the ones in the Garden of Eden, or little g gods. They're still ruling as gods. They're ruling as a deity. They're not ruling as a human being in a kingship. And I feel like that's something that gets missed a lot.
It does. It does. Yeah, you're not wrong about that.
And we have the Canaanites who come up in the Bible multiple times in the Old Testament. And, they are a warring type people. But then when the Jewish people start coming along, they keep having these wars with the Canaanites. But again, if they're all from the same people, why is everyone fighting?
Mhm.
So I go back to the Old Testament, very gory, very bloody. There's wars. God is basically ruling these people, telling them, I want you to go kill all these people in this city and then take it over. And then in other cases, he tells them, I want you to go in and kill all the men and the babies, but take the women and take the women, if you can read between the lines. That's a very gross way of saying it. And again, if this is the divine creator of everything, why can't everyone get along? Right? Like, why do you have to take these certain peoples that you force to worship you in a very specific way and sacrifice you? Take another living being, whether it's a human and or an animal, another being that was created by the divine creator, and kill it and then burn it just to venerate that god. That makes no sense. It
Yes.
never made sense to me. And honestly, between you and I and everyone who's listening, it's blood magic.
Mhm.
It's sacrifice, it's a blood covenant, and it's blood magic. And that does not fall in line with the divine source creator that I know we all have the spark of deep within all of us.
Mhm. Well, and at the very least, even if you look at any of the spiritual texts, whether it be the Old Testament or the Quran or any of them, even if you look at them as just allegorical, they're all telling similar, very, very similar stories, obviously. But the problem that really comes from those particular spiritualities based on the worship of Yaldabaoth is that they have a Jungian problem, and that whatever that god is clearly never did any shadow work, because even if you go by his narrative and the narration thereof, and let's just say that there are evil things, demons, etc., that are descended from his works, his creations, they would still, if he were the only one, be nothing more than a reflection of whatever he is, whatever the darker, more sadist side of him is. And there is a dark and sadist side all the
Uh-huh.
way down to burning human sacrifices. And because the smell of the flesh pleases your God, as is talked about in the Old Testament. So
Uh-huh.
there's definitely some very strange things going on. And blood is a large part of it. Blood and spirits, and the sudden realization at some point that whatever this lesser demiurgical being has, realizing that there is something above him and there's something that he needs back, and he wants loyal servants who will play his game on a continuous basis. And I suspect it will drive to that eventually.
Oh
So
yeah. Oh yeah. I'm working us up there. one of the other things that always struck me was you in the Old Testament, you couldn't say God's name, right? God had this super secret name, but no one could say it.
Mhm.
Well, in my line of work with doing entity clearings and removals and exorcisms, there's another kind of entity that doesn't like you to know its name.
Mhm.
You know what it is?
There are any number of lower entities that really don't like that, but particularly demons are not fond of that because then you have power over them.
Exactly.
Mhm.
Exactly. And that has always bugged me. And I still remember it was a very long time ago, but I had some very well meaning, wonderful Jehovah Witnesses who came up to the door to chat. And I'll always take time to chat with them. Not that they really want to hear what I have to say, but I'll try. And one of them in the back said, "Well, we know God's true name." And immediately in the back of my head, I thought, oh, because let me tell you, if you know God's name, then that means
You're a better person than I am because I totally would have been like, well, let me see your parlor trick.
I wanted to be nice, but I did work my way into witchcraft and having control over things based on names, and I can tell you that they left pretty quickly after that.
Yeah, they
But
don't like that for some reason. It's built into those very quote unquote faithful followers not to like that for some reason, and not to realize that I mean we were given dominion,
Mhm.
so it's not his clay to work with, it's ours.
And it also just beguiles me when I see these different rituals in churches. Communion is a big one that I think everyone knows what that is, and transmogrification. And that's witchcraft 101.
Mhm.
And you're drinking the blood of someone, and then you're eating the flesh of someone. I mean, that's again, we go into blood covenants and blood and word. It's okay. Let's let's do a little bypass and let's talk about Gnosticism basic beliefs. And I want to go into this because Alan, you and I fall similarly, but a little bit differently on the lines of our Gnostic beliefs. And I want you to
Mhm.
go into yours, which I know I have asked everyone to listen to your episodes that you've done on them. You've done a great job
Mhm.
on your channel of on your podcast of talking about them on your episode, The Adepts. But I feel like it warrants just another cursory listen. So let's
Sure.
talk about
Yeah.
your definition of how everything started and how it works.
Okay. And mine do have a very evolving system of ideas more than beliefs, and they it tends to the cosmology tends to change a little bit pretty frequently, and I'm okay with that. Um, so basically, I'd made that joke before in the beginning, and just recently did an episode called "Before in the Beginning." That's all about what my current sort of system of understanding is, or at least part of it. So it's basically my belief that there is a God, a figure that we would see as a God. JJ says hello, Kim. But that God is not something that you can pray to, that you can venerate. You can pray to it, and that's fine. But it's more of praying within yourself to the Christos, the light that's within yourself. Basically, this divine light, this thing that existed before anything else existed. It created these various dual male female. What are sometimes called syzygies, but they're forms. They're Plato's idea is realm of forms. So they'd be all the various things that you associate with higher thinking and higher consciousness in male female terms, right? And one of those forms, wisdom, Sophia, for whatever reason, bearing in mind that as all things sort of move away from its primary source, think of Pythagoreanism again, this light would be zero, zero would be holding everything. And as each number comes, it's moved further and further away from zero. It is therefore less perfect than what zero can ever be because zero is all things. So Sophia, as she's moved away from the light a bit, she decides that she's going to contemplate herself. She's not so much a person as she is an idea, a form, but she contemplates herself and realizes herself. And when she does this, she accidentally emanates something from herself, much like the light did. But when she emanates, and what she emanates is imperfect because it was done out of the light, it was done away from the light. It has some of the light stuck in it, but it's not bright like the light. In fact, they use the word dim, and the word dim, like twilight, but also very much like when we say someone's not very bright, they're dim. That's what this creature was, this lion-headed, serpent-legged entity that she hid away in what they call a cloud, which is clearly some lower realm. So we all know through what we understand about physics at this point, there's this miraculous thing they call dark matter that they can't seem to get their minds around, which everything is apparently created from. Whatever was there underneath the light was that dark matter. And when this being exits that cloud into the dark matter, he thinks that he is the one and the only God. And as such, he starts using this matter, which is imbued with primeval fire, to create various things, including the universe. And he sets about all the rules of motion, all the things that they talk about in the book of Enoch are what he set into place and put into place and put into play at that time. He creates the earth and separates the waters from the land and light from dark and all of those things, and then goes about basically creating his angels, what they call archons. These are the angels that you would know of from classical Christianity, you know, the Michaels and etc., Gabriels, etc. But they're evil just like he is, right? And they descend even further. The more he creates, the less that they have, the less they have in common with the light, the less power that they have, the more evil they become. He creates primeval man, but he creates him out of clay. And although it'll writhe and wriggle because it's given the cosmic fire that he has control of, it has no spark inside of it. At some point, Sophia reaches out to him and he doesn't understand what he's hearing or what he's seeing as this reflection from above and tells him to breathe life into the Adama. That's the original name for Adam. When he does breathe this life into the Adama, he breathes part of Sophia's spark into Adama, and that brings man to life. From there, of course, woman is separated from man. And there's a fun parallel here with those Hermetic texts as well, because it's very similar. You know, the seven hermaphroditic men who were the original men who were made up of spirit that was both male and female and then separated. The same thing is happening here with Adam and Eve and separating the rib from Adam to create Eve at that time. So these sparks, we all have this longing in us, no matter what we have, no matter how fulfilled we are in our life. We all have this thing in us that knows that something's a little off. Always, no matter how good life is, you're always going to have a little something that there's always going to be something else you want, something else you need. You're always trying to fill a hole inside of you, unless you raise your consciousness and you realize what's going on. At that point, you're trying to get your spark back to that original light. And to do that, you have to be smarter than the archons that are the powers over this plane, those four guardian angels of the garden, as well as Yada Baoth. Now, I do think that there is some truth to, and again, these are allegorical. These are world stories that can be changeable, mutable, etc.
Mhm.
All that matters is that you know that there's one great light out there that you are supposed to get back to, some greater achievement that, as Hermes said, not all men and women can make, climbing the seven rungs of the ladder to get past the seven celestial spheres of this world, to get back to that light. But I do believe there's one particular Gnostic story that I very much believe is true, and it plays back into that there being multiple gods in the Old Testament. So I believe it's the fourth power, Sabaoth, who is a son of Yada-Baoth or Yahweh. And when Sophia first reaches out to the lower spheres as she's trying to rectify the mistake that she made, basically only one of the archons hears her other than Yada-Baoth, and that's Sabaoth. And later on, Sabaoth takes the place of Yada-Baoth, He's not a good God. His name literally means the one over all the chaos, is what it means. But he does understand and acknowledge that there is something above him, and it is through him that Sophia's partner, the other syzygy, the other part of her, the Christos, is allowed to be born into the world, is through Sabaoth, which also explains the difference between the way the God acts in parts of the Old Testament, because it's two different gods doing two different
Mhm,
things. Neither's entirely good, for sure,
mhm.
but one is better than the other.
Awesome. And in listening to you describe all of that, when Sophia comes up with her original thought and thinks things into existence, I come back to what I say a lot: thoughts are things. And this is kind of the original, the OG version of that, right? Careful what you think, because you can manifest something unwillingly and not fully comprehend what it is that you're manifesting. The other part where when she's reaching out through the lower spheres, it's very in line with the different dimensions, right? Because if you're from a higher dimension reaching out to a lower dimension, they don't quite, they're not able to see you in the context of how you really are. And they're not even able to hear you fully and comprehend what it is that you're saying or speaking or conveying.
Mhm.
And this comes into a lot of times, like when I deal with spirit and I'm getting messages, everyone thinks like it's so cut and dry, like they're going to drive
Mm-mm.
by with a little poster saying, do this, blah, blah. And sometimes it is very clear. Once in a while, like it's extremely clear. Most of the time, though, I'm scrambling to figure out, okay, what does this mean? And then I have to be led through all these, different synchronicities in order to figure out what it actually means. And then that sits right. And then I proceed forward. After usually I get some, yes, you figured it out. Go on. Good girl. Um, so with my belief system, we differ slightly. So and mine is going to take a little bit of a hard turn because my origin story is a little less esoteric as yours and filters in a little more of the science, but they fall along the same lines.
Mhm.
So you have source, which I often refer to as spirit, which we all have a spark thereof in each of us. And that piece, which is in all of us, is just like you said, that thing that makes us hearken back and know that we're part of a collective, something that is way bigger than just you and I and being humans on this planet. So in the beginning, right, there was source and it was compact. And then whether you call it the Big Bang or in the beginning, it said it wanted to express itself. And then the universe was formed. And then all the planets are formed and different beings are formed and life forms on different planets, not just this one. I actually understand and believe that this has happened multiple times. It has been created and then it goes back to source where everything comes back to how it was. And then it is expressed again, i.e., Big Bang, and then all contracts back. And this is where we get some of the old ones or the old gods, right? Because they came from the time before this time's Big Bang, if you want to talk about linear time that most of us live by. So in our existence, there are actual old gods that, you know, we would be smaller than ants to humans. And they have lived through this expansion and contraction, and they are of a way higher level than us. So, for our purposes, we have our Big Bang, everything is created, different civilizations are created, different peoples are created, different planets, everything's kind of happening all at the same time, right? And then you have different dimensions. So, when it comes to the people we are today on this planet, I don't believe that we came here or were not originally from here. I believe that we came from a civilization that was elsewhere, multiple ones, who basically needed a new place to land, or they were just, hanging out, and they helped terraform this planet, came down, and that's why we have different types of people throughout history. Archaeology will confirm this. There have been many different types of humanoid type beings
Mhm.
that lived, many lived
It's
at the same time.
what might really interest you here too, JJ. I'll throw in just and then let you go back to the exposition piece here. Um, First thing, so I very much so believe that same thing that you believe as far as the light and going through multiple cycles. Spirit and soul are two different things that most people don't understand. Soul is the seat for the spirit, but the spirit is everything that you have ever been in all those incarnations, which is where those old gods come from, why they know so much, why they're attached to certain places, etc. It's the same reason you know so much in past life regression, etc. The soul is the thing that is actually attached to and animates your body to your spirit. That is the piece that is eternally, really, for better or worse, connected to this realm that we were in. But the part that I was going to touch on real quick there was, I do believe, because I said I'm not a Franz Kafka-esque Gnostic, so I'm not a fan of the cockroach, for example. But instead of looking at Sophia making a mistake, and that's one of the things that I've been working on how I narrate those things. But I heard it once said, and this is the best way I ever heard it said, was that the light was full of so much love that it overflowed on accident, and it created these things.
Isn't
And I
that beautiful?
it is, and I really do love that version of it very, very, very much. Now on the other planetary thing, uh and we can definitely get into that at some point on my side too, but I very much so had a much heavier belief in that or idea of that up until recently, and I'd still believe that there's obviously multiple realms, obviously multiple types of beings, etc. But I can't, there's a word for that. It's called astronautic. So I had to throw it in there. You have to use astronautic from now on. So
Okay. Me with labels. The last time I tried to use a label, I found out it hadn't been used in 500 years, so no one knew what I was talking about. That got fun. So with these different beings that came from different planets were all of different dimensions at the same time. So not everything was existing on the same plane. And this is why I refer to oftentimes layered realities, because we really do. We coexist with so many different things at the same time. We have no clue. And a lot of people see JJ Rose 777. They think it's kind of a shout out to the divine. And although, yes, it is, at the same time, it's because I believe as we exist here, we believe we exist on 7 levels below and 77 levels above. So we are not just us right here. We're existing 7 levels below us and 77 levels above us. And the 77th level above us is one with source divine, spirit, creator, true creator, right? Not who created these little bodies. And when you get about level, 54 and up, there is no more delineation between male or female. It's completely androgynous. And, some people will say maybe it's a lower level than that, but there still is a separation between whether we call it male, female. When you get on higher levels, it's called something else. It's a little more of like the yin and yang concept, if you will. It's hard to explain because it doesn't exist on this planet, and
mhm.
therefore talking about a concept that no one can barely grasp what the heck I'm talking about to begin with, right?
We can't grasp what water is or what salt is, so it's very hard to imagine what any of those things would be or to explain what they would be.
Good point, right? And to be honest, anything about level 20th and up, I think our brains would just explode because we're not fully capable of comprehending on this level what those things are. Now, as these things all descend down to earth, different ones are terraforming it, different beings are existing. I believe at a time there was a convergence where the veil was thin enough that the different dimensions peeped through and they knew of each other. Some of them could converse, which is how you have a lot of lore about people working with the Fae and having crossover and going to the Fae realm, and people going off with the gods like Enoch did. And like Ezekiel, there's another story in the Bible about a young boy who basically goes to this tree. He's taken to quote unquote heaven, comes back. It's been like 5 generations later, and hundreds of years later, and he's pretty much the same age, wondering why everyone else is he's ever known is dead. So that also gets brought up in the Bible too. This isn't, you can't throw the baby out with the bathwater when it comes to some of these legends and lore. A lot of people say, oh, well, the Fae weren't in the Bible, so I'm not going to talk about them. But they were. They're just called something else, right? And they're talk about all these different beings exist at the same time. And due to the veil being thin at that time, they were able to converse. This is why there's so much discourse in the past. It was commonplace to understand that the gods, quote unquote, lived among you. You were able to talk to them, see them, make deals with them. It wasn't like just what we go on now, which is this blind faith that someone's listening, right? You were actually able to see. This is why they had physical representations of these gods. And also why later on it said we would make certain physical representations, because if you were able to peek through the veil and see what these things really looked like, they were either so disgusting your mind would melt a little bit, very
Mhm.
H.P. Lovecraft there, right? Or in other time, like you would see them and they were so beautiful that you would be dazzled pretty much and almost in a state of a stupor or a spell. So all of this is reported through history. This isn't just me coming up with something out of my, rectum, right? So these things are documented, but this is also something that's very near and dear to my heart, because this is not what I understand. This is a belief system based on things that I've seen and I've experienced. And obviously, I have seen past lives. I've seen past lives where I have not been human. I was not on this planet. I've been on other places. I'm not even in a human, I'm not even in a body. I'm basically just an energy. And understanding that, there's you're one with something else. And when that something else is taken away, there's a longing for it. And whether that's your other half, quote unquote, or your soulmate, or whether it's your connection with the divine, being separated from it hurts. So when people say, like love hurts or being human hurts, at times it does, especially when you are away from that divine source. And for me, the real rub of religion, organized religion over time, has been separating us from that connection with the divine that is in all of us.
Mhm.
That making us go through a priest or a pope or a man or somebody who has this special book, or you have to confess to a person, right, in order to appease God, in order to get whatever you want.
You got to go
Or
through middle management. Yes.
exactly. And for me, taking away that expression and that link with the divine, which most pagans had, to be honest, they did.
Mhm. Yeah.
And religion made it its job to come in and wipe them out. Now, it might sound like I'm beating up on religion, but one of the bigger points that I want to get to is why religion in the first place even had these mass genocides.
Mhm.
Because they did. They were being told by a god to go exterminate other peoples, not just peoples, in order to keep this line, right? Of we like these specific breed of people, we want them, and everything else needs to be taken out. And during this time period, as this is starting, right, I believe at that time the veil was still thin enough that we were still able to have these peep throughs. And this is when there were people going on crusades to kill off the Fae. people were going on these crusades to kill off these gods. I mean, there's a lot of old legends and lores, whether it's Greek or Roman or Sumerian, some of the other ones, where
Mhm.
they were devising ways to kill gods. Think of
Absolutely.
that, just like in your head, take a moment and think about the fact that physical human people, right? Well, we think they were human anyway, or whatever they were, humanish, loose term, were trying to kill gods. And then we have this Nephilim, right, which is part God, part human. These men of well renowned or women of well renowned, because there were female Nephilim as well. And Enoch basically hears God saying, I want all the bastards and half breeds killed in regards to the Nephilim. And so, again, here we have another biblical
And
source stating,
strangely, Enoch actually goes to bat for them, tries to be the middleman, which
yeah,
doesn't make any sense unless there's something greater that he already knows exists.
but at this time, when the veil starts to thicken, right, probably just out of survival for all these different things, they're like, please, pack this up. Let's make these things a little distant from us so that we can live and not be attacked constantly
Mhm.
and not have the peep throughs, right, as much. You did still have people who were able to see through these different dimensions, people like Enoch, who were able to talk to the gods, right, not
Mhm.
just one god, gods, and the angels, and the Nephilim, and all these things existed at the same time. And so I want to bring up with you, so we we kind of agree, but slightly variation, right,
Mhm.
of how everything started.
It's
But
all
for the
allegorical.
yeah, and for the most part, there's nothing that either of us have said that we like vehemently disagree with at this
No,
point.
no.
So when we get to the point where people are basically being slaughtered because they're being told to by these different gods, and yet they're supposedly the same religion or very close knockoffs thereof, right? Because
Mhm.
Jewish, Christians, and Islam, they're not that different. There's slight variations on a theme. They're all from the Abrahamic line. And yet they're just going around and killing people left and right and then taking over.
Mhm.
And that makes me wonder, was this all just a giant play by gods to have people that they had control over?
Yeah. So, real quick, and let me touch on this, and I'll give my version of that answer. I'll catch up the rest of my cosmology with the rest of yours, since I stopped at the higher sphere and just the creation. So the part that I didn't get into, which is again, we're very similar. I do believe in the multiple realms. I do believe in the multiple gods. I believe that all those old gods at least represented some type of spirit that was here at one point in time, if it's not still here. Some of those actually did walk the earth. There's more than enough evidence. There's more than enough philosophy. One that you and I have talked about before is Hermes Trismegistus, which is really one that I lean into very heavily. Uh, the one thing that I do very much so believe is that regardless of the veil, whether it's thick or thin, we always have the opportunity to touch base with all of those things and to follow all of those things. There's nothing wrong with following a great many of those, although some of them are very highly questionable, I do believe, from time to time. Uh, but the beauty of it is that all of these things that organized religion tries to keep us away from, and some of them, yes, we probably shouldn't be playing with because we don't have the capacity to understand exactly what they are and their various different forms and how they affect us. But we were given, again, dominion over all of those things. This is why medieval grimoires were not out of line with Christianity. This understanding that, again, this is our clay to work with. We were created in the image of our quote unquote master, our craftsman. We are therefore craftsmen, but we're craftsmen that are imbued with higher spirits as well as lower soul.
Mm-hmm.
And as such, we have the ability to discern from the two of them whether our works are good or whether they are bad. Some of those lower gods Some of those archons, as I sometimes tend to reference a lot of those, not all of them, but a lot of them, uh, some of those were very, very somewhat dark entities that were playing into Yaldabaoth's and the various gods, playing into what they wanted out of us. And this is why you get some of the Nephilim. And there are positive and negative Nephilim too. That's something that doesn't get talked about. Nobody ever mentions how come in Enoch, the angel that's supposed to have led this whole thing, once he's approached by Enoch, goes, "Oh yeah, that was all Azazel over there, who's not even with us right now, who just happened to bring us metallurgy and pretty much all of the hallmarks of modern civilization, very much like Prometheus, very,
Mhm.
very similar archetype to Prometheus. How come everybody always mentions his name, but they never mention the other one? Because you're trying to be thrown off the trail of certain things. And so I think that this is what you're driving at, is getting to this. Was this all a plan and all a ploy? And yes, I do believe it is. I also believe that it continues. It goes on every single day, and it's continued to go on every single day. And I think there's a strange thing here, and this is where, if we haven't lost people yet, we're going to lose them here. So those angels that came to Earth, those archons that came to Earth because they saw human women and thought they were beautiful. By the way, those women, the angels were mostly taken to Tartarus in the Book of Enoch, right? You know what happens to the women, don't you? They become the sirens. That's where sirens come from. They are cursed to
Interesting.
become the sirens. So, anyways, there's a thing called dragon blood and there's a thing called fairy blood. And
Mhm.
if you're descended from the male side of this Nephilim family, you're dragon blood. And from the female side, you're fairy blood. And those genetics have meaning and they still exist. There are still societies of people who believe that they are dragon blood. And they believe very much so that they are blood royale, that they're the only people that are fit to be the kings of this earth because they're the only people that are from divine descent upon this earth. They tend to be people that are in power. They tend to be the people that cause wars. They tend to be the people that organize religions. And they understand very much so how the system works. And I would even say this: they know that there's another God above the God of this world, but they don't care because they can manipulate the clay of this world for those negative, very materialistic, uh, degraded means. And they also understand that when they die, they're just going to come back. So why do they spend so much time trying to control things? They don't need the money. They have all the money that there is, and they can just print more if they want more of it. They build up occult libraries. They build up crazy familial wealth, crazy familial knowledge, crazy everything. And then they spend all their time as royalty, or we don't even have to see them as royalty anymore, as bankers, etc., basically inbreeding because they're trying to
Mhm.
strengthen their bloodlines and not lose all of those traits and get back to where they came from. And they just
And
take advantage of that cosmic loop.
yeah, and 100%. And this is the part that always fascinates me when people get into the Nephilim. Of, if you believe that there are these angels and quote unquote fallen angels, right? Well, to be perfectly honest, when you look at the fallen angels and the reason why they fell basically because they felt bad for humanity and wanted to teach
Mhm,
them to survive on their own. So if we go
mhm,
back to the Anunnaki, right, in Babylonian and Sumerian times, and we look at Enki and Enlil, you know, we have the whole duality there. One's good, one's bad, and then the bad one is trying to convince everyone else that the good one is really the bad one, which, with the Old Testament Yahweh, we huge similarities. If you haven't listened to Billy Carson about some of that, highly recommend. But then when we have these quote unquote fallen angels, why did we as humans, if we were supposedly all created and we were the only thing here, why would we have needed to be taught about war and making weapons,
mhm,
right? If there weren't other things here and other things in play. And then when we have the whole, that how the Nephilim were even born, right? Where you have angels or gods that mate with a human. In order to mate with a human, I'm just, physics 101 in biology, there has to be some sort of physicality, right? And you can be
Yeah.
physical, but from another dimension and cross over into this one and sow your seed, if you will, and then cause a pregnancy. Now, what exactly is going to come out is going to be a little bit in the middle, right? It's going to be a bit
Mhm.
of both. So it's going to be able to see to a higher dimension, but also be able to exist on this one. Might be a little bit of a harder existence than your average human who's just straight, you know, made of clay, whatever you want to call it. Um, but this is where this very weird line starts coming. And this is why I have a hard time understanding why the ancient alien theory and the fallen angel theory, like, why are people having a hard time equating the two? It just makes sense. It doesn't make
Why do they not only do they have a hard time equating the two, why do the people that believe very clearly in God of the Old and New Testament and believe very clearly in angels scoff when you mention aliens? And then when
yeah.
you talk to people that believe in aliens or interdimensional beings and you mention angels, they scoff at the idea. It's you.
Mhm.
I don't understand that myself either. It doesn't make any sense to me. Or any of the more pragmatic religious systems based around those particular books that don't believe in anything outside of God, that angels can't, there's certain forms of Islam that don't believe that angels could have fallen. Angels can't be corrupted, they're perfect. No, I don't believe that either.
Exactly. And, and then you have to go into, well, what's really the definition of an angel? If it just means, from the sky or from the stars, oh, I mean, that
Mhm.
has alien written all over it. And in episode one, when I
Mhm.
went through our friendly visitors, I tried to give numerous examples, whether it's, they're quote unquote aliens, or they said they're from a different dimension, or they're gods, or they're fae, or they're this. They're all explaining something very similar. We're just calling
Mhm.
it different names, and different dimensions
Well, and
exist.
doesn't
It's
that
a thing.
that harkens back to that whole archetype of the Tower of Babel. The reason we argue over it is because we're meant to argue over it, because we were designed to argue over it so that we never get to the bottom of it and never make any forward progress.
And with the Tower of Babel, when it talks about, him getting very mad and basically breaking everything up into all the different languages, I believe it's because before that time, we were all able to communicate via telepathy. And so
Mhm.
if if every being was able to telepathically communicate and then all of a sudden we're stripped of that, right, via either the veil
Mhm.
thickens up or something is mutated within all of us, and that power is just boom, it's taken from us on this level, we lost an entire sense. So yeah, then we all have to
Mhm.
figure out, okay, now we got to start calling these things words, and people are going to speak different languages and dialects, and words are going to mean different things, just like how language evolves. But I remember sending you a video recently where it was a physicist and they were talking about a different, like a higher dimension. I think it was the fourth dimension. And they were saying, well,
Mhm.
technically, this exists 90 degrees from our dimension. And I hearken back
Mhm.
to the episode you did on your show. I think it was the Adepts, where you talk about the jinn exists 90 degrees from humans. So
Mhm.
it's
And that they
all
have
there.
neighbors.
One more time.
Mhm. And that they have neighbors, right?
Yeah.
The jinn live at right angles to us and they have neighbors.
Yeah. So who are the
Mhm.
neighbors, right? And
Right.
and then over time, because we had the dark ages where, the majority of people couldn't read, you had people who understood these concepts who were slaughtered basically, right? Convert or die,
Mhm.
pick one. And so all this information was lost. The Library of Alexandria, one of, honestly, probably,
Burned on purpose.
yes, and honestly, probably the worst calamity that's ever hit humanity civilization ever, because of everything that was lost there. Still breaks my heart. um that alone, with the amount of information that we lost, and then welcome in the dark ages where it's convert or die, you can't speak about any of that. All this old knowledge was lost, and therefore all this communication was lost. And then we go from all these, the fae, the little people, the this, the jinn, the that, and now everything becomes, well, there's good angels and bad angels, there's good jinn and bad jinn, and it's now it's a demon or it's an angel, and there's no in between. Everything is either good or bad, and we're all lumping all of these different things into these two concepts because that's all we know, because we have blinders on, thanks to you all know who I'm referring to, thanks to you know who. I don't need to call them out. Get a call from the Pope one day. Um, but, but it's true. And
Call me. My last name's Bishop. We'll talk.
okay, good. So with all this information lost, there still are people who incarnate, who blessedly come through and have access to some of that old information. We call them psychics today. We call them gifted, um, people who are knowers, people like me, I came through with a knowing, with an understanding, being able to see through certain things, being able to communicate with things, having a lineage, thank God, that was able to also have these gifts. So I was prepared and prepped and being able to understand what it was that I was seeing, communicating with, what to do, what not to do, what to kind of stay away from, what to be leery of, what to just flat out say no to, i.e., blood covenants, right? Anything having to do with blood, it's a hard pass for me. But when you look at the blood covenants of the past and you look at all of this genocide and why there were, things like Solomon and his ring and wanting to control the jinn in order to build his temples. Does
Mm-hmm.
that sound nice? Does that sound ethical?
I don't know. I would have to. This is where it's not something I would do, but this is where I would have to look at exactly what he actually thought he was controlling, right? And then I also would have to look at it with the understanding of knowing some of the idea of his belief system and knowing that there was something greater than him, whether or not he was using that to some degree, because again, the Dominion thing, it's our clay. There are gifts here if you can use them and use them properly. On the face of it, no, it's not nice, but it's also not a thing that I would play with because some of those things you can't comprehend. Even if you can control them, you don't really know what you're controlling. So,
Yes. And the fact that there are stories in the Bible that talk about controlling and having dominion over things that we don't fully understand,
hmm
and that that's somehow okay. I mean, in a
hmm
way, I mean, it wasn't even indentured servitude. It was straight up like, I control you, slavery.
right.
He controlled these beings and had them do his
hmm
bidding. And that begs to question, how many other times in the past did this happen with other things? And how many of these things really don't like us because of that past history? Well, every time we show ourselves to you guys, you just try to trap us or control us and have us do your bidding. So we're not going to see you anymore. We're going to disappear. We're going to hide ourselves in a pocket dimension, or we're just going to steer clear of you guys, period, end, because you don't play nice in the sandbox. And I get that. I get
hmm
that, on a huge level. And there are things that I've seen, and I can tell like they're really, really leery. They understand, and I say, I'm here out of respect. I'm not here to bug you or hurt you. Like, I'm just here to understand what's going on. And for the most part, able to have a pretty good communication and things will back off, right? But there are also times when things are acting up, which people would consider, like a spiritual attack. But when you hear it from the thing that's doing the attacking of why it's attacking,
Hmm.
Sometimes it's because somebody didn't play nice, and you do reap what you sow.
Yeah, I think that that can certainly be true of a great many of those sort of spirits or things crossing over from other realms. Um, I would say that there are also, though, unfortunately, a great many of those things, and I think you put your finger on it with demons earlier that don't like us in the first place.
Mhm.
That want nothing to do with us. This is why, and they don't attach to things the way that we attach to things. There's reasons for things in ceremony, for example. You know, the reason that you use incense in ceremony is because they can attach to aromas. They can attach to smells because it covers us up. They don't like the way that we smell. They can smell this lower realm, this earthiness on us and the degradation, and they don't like us that we have what we have because they do realize that this is a gift too, being where we're at. So um, you have to be careful with it. And it's not always, like you said, it's not always black or white. Sometimes it's gray area. But what is gray area to a thing that could, that treats you, that could look at you as though you were an ant that could be stepped on and it would have no consequences whatsoever?
Right. And, I say it probably every episode I record. Don't mess with things you don't understand. Okay. If
Hmm.
you're going out, you're doing paranormal stuff, great, cool, go look around. But would you want someone marching into your house in the middle of the night, screaming for you to wake up and come do something? I personally would be
Right.
ticked, right? Like, just leave me be.
Hmm.
So, but with that, and I want to piggyback on that because you did bring up a great point, which is this life is a gift. And it's very, very easy for us to think this life is hard. And don't get me wrong, I know it is very arduous to be human, right? We go through a lot of hardships, and sometimes just existing is hard, right? Waking up every morning. But that being said, we are so veiled on this level that the gift is remembering and reconnecting with our divine spark and remembering who we are and
Hmm.
taking our power back. And that's the one thing in the Gnostic Gospels that I really, really love and enjoy, because there are more than a few that talk about, in reality, Adam and Eve, like from the get, humans always had more power over these gods. They just didn't remember it because we came from
Hmm.
spirit having a human experience, right? Or spirits having a human
Yeah,
experience, and we forgot.
we didn't remember being the divine versions of ourself at all.
Right. And
Hmm.
in the Gnostic Gospels, especially in Thomas and even that of Mary Magdalene, when you hear what Jesus is saying, he's talking about waking up that Christos, that divine spark within you, that connection to the divine, connection to source. It's not going through a middleman. It's not going through XYZ gods. It's going straight to where we came from. And that feeling is one of the most beautiful feelings there is. There's no way fully to describe it. If you haven't had it yourself, I pray that it happens for you, whether it's in meditation or a dream and you get it just for a glimpse. But that's why you have so many near death experiences where people cross over and they say, "Oh, the love," and I felt like I was home. And then they choose to come back though, and they remember that separation. And although it hurts them in a way to be back, because it sometimes does hurt being on this plane, there's still that remembrance. And then
I
you
would
see,
cry when we're born.
yes. And yeah, actually, yeah, you're completely right. Cry when we're born because we just
It
forgot a
hurts.
whole bunch and it hurts. And part of that though is the chance to remember and to rebuild and to do all the shadow work in order to become the beautiful divine being that we are, to shed all the human, forgive my language, bullshit that is. right? Of all this stuff that we come in with, all these, I've got this trauma or this problem, this, that, and the other, to to
And all the
overcome that.
crutches that you put underneath
Ooh.
yourself physically as you continue on that path until you get to where you need to be at.
Speak on that a little bit more. I like that.
Yeah, all the vice, all the things that degrade physicality. Physicality is made to fall apart. It's a disposable commodity. Everything returns to dust, and the faster that we can return everything to dust, that is what we are while we're on this planet, the faster the lower beings get their spark back and get more power to create again and put us back into slavery and servitude. Whether or not life is a gift, that's what they expect of it when they put you back here. So I'm setting here chain smoking. It's one of the last vices that I have. I've started trying to take care of myself and eat right, and I've basically quit drinking, which is weird for a distiller to say. But all those little crutches we use to get through the bullshit of life that
Mhm.
usually just make it even worse, right? Those are all things that count as well. So, um, and they add to the pain over time, and that's what they do.
And sometimes the crutch that I've seen people use is just staying stuck in their turmoil and drama.
Yeah, yeah. Won't
And
do anything to change anything. Won't do anything to try to grow. Won't do. Yes, I know. My family is all from Kentucky and Appalachia, and I love Kentucky and I love Appalachia. But you talk about people who are paralyzed by conjecture. That's what they are. This is the way it is because this is the way it is. There's nothing we can do about it, and let's just suffer through it.
mm, I and maybe it's just the problem solver in me. No,
Mhm.
I wasn't even allowed to say the word problem growing up, just so you know. I'm using that for public consumption. But we would refer to what anyone else would call a problem as an opportunity. And the reason for that was to get your mind out of problem makes it sound like I'm stuck here, I'm stuck with it. It's negative. Every negative situation in your life is an opportunity to grow, to heal, and to potentially catalyze or be a catalyst for an opportunity for somebody else to grow and to heal. So it's kind of
Yeah.
the whole, to short form it, it's life gives you lemons, make lemonade.
I'm
And then
good with that as long as you're not the person that says that Monday is the best day of the week because you get to think about all the things you're going to get done that week.
I have an Excel
I have
sheet
to
for
I
that.
have a I have a gray area as well. That's my gray area. Let's not we can't.
And, I listen for the 98% of my days, I am pretty happy. I
Mhm.
really, really am. Like I'm for the most part in a good mood. And my husband still, all these years later is still like, really? I
You're still good with this?
yeah, like you sure?
Mhm.
Yeah. And obviously I have emotions. I definitely, I get angry about things. I get definitely incensed, especially about injustice. Um, I get sad at times. Typically, my sadness is more of almost like a grief or a mourning for somebody else or empathy and compassion. But for the most part, I'm happy. I'm grateful. I would say 99% of the time when I shed tears, it's out of joy and gratitude.
Mhm.
And that's because, though, I've chosen to do the work. I can remember being a teenager and, being in that kind of like gothy emo phase, right? And I would sit and I would listen to music like these really sad songs or really highly emotional songs. And I wanted to really understand what that person felt when they were making that. Like, what does that emotion feel like? And take myself and put myself in that mindset so that I could be more compassionate and empathetic towards other people who really were feeling that way. Because let's face it, right? Like, I mean, teenage years alone are just rough, not only with everything you got to deal with, but then you add all these hormones and this physical body to it. Oh, it's a lot. But it's also a really great time to start understanding who you are and how you emote. And if you can create really good habits and a positive mindset to want to plow through and grow and do that work.
Mhm.
And, I am a light worker, but a lot of people nowadays don't fully comprehend what that means. It doesn't mean that life is sunshine and rainbows and I sit here and pretend that nothing bad's going to happen. A lot of bad has been happening.
Mhm.
My job as a light worker is to shed light. And sometimes that's not the most wonderful and pretty job that I have to do, right? Sometimes I have to tell people, hey, you're a Debbie Downer because you enjoy the attention you get from being a Debbie Downer.
Mhm.
And that's definitely not what Debbie Downers want to hear, right?
No, they don't like that.
They don't. But, I also expect in my friendships people to call me out on my shit,
Hmm.
right? So
Yeah, that's the way it should
it's
be.
it's it's not something that I wouldn't expect from someone in the opposite position. And the reason I bring a lot of this up is because I feel that, in understanding where we came from and who we are and the importance of everything that we're talking about with the Gnostic scriptures and the gospels, from not only our origin points, right, but to the point of taking our power back and not having fear, and like you were saying, taking our dominion over, of understanding that also comes with an internal balance of power. Like you were saying, there's many people who believe they're from a specific bloodline, right? And so they usurp as much power and commodities as they possibly can, even though, they could give a tenth of what they own away and feed almost an entire continent of people and solve some of these issues that we have with humanity
They're
very, very quickly.
they're too
And then,
worried about trying to become transhuman because it's the only way they can escape the slavery that they've sold themselves into.
will you go into that a little bit deeper on
Hmm.
that subject?
Yeah, so they're stuck to their fleshy prison. They know that they're coming back here repeatedly over and over again, and so they become very obsessed with this idea of not only are they the only ones that are capable of making these great, grand, divine decisions, and that you should listen to everything that they say. You ever notice that when you hear one of these people, I'm not going to name any names, but when you hear one of them talk, they talk, they do the first thing that is the first rule of black magic. They tell you exactly what they're going to do. And then as they talk about any of the various things that they talk about, whether it be, an implant or whatever, they talk as though, no, you will have this. This will be your thing, right? And it's to get you that much more ingrained into this physical world, and to not being the spirit and the soul that you're supposed to be. But it's also, there's rebellion within rebellion. They're rebelling even against their own craftsman god. They're trying to become him, to overcome him in some way, to escape what they think is this firmament, right? To get away from here. That's what all of that stuff is. And that's what all of that has been based in since they wrote the first grimoire that was based within the roots of the Christian religion, and some of the Judaic stuff as well. So,
Well, it's interesting you bring up the black magic part with them immediately telling you what it is that they're going to do. Because I can tell you from what I know of black magic practitioners, I have never heard that
mhm.
they have to state what it is that they're doing.
There's a reason why they do. And so it has everything to do with karma. It's a karmic loophole. The idea that you say it, if you say it and then you can still sell it to someone, that karma doesn't come back on you because you told them, you let them know. It's just like a bad contract. That's all it is. It's just like a bad contract.
But don't you feel at a higher level, like more so than just turnover on this plane? Don't you feel on a higher level that there's still karmic responsibility and karma for that? If you dupe somebody else just because you have fancy words,
Maybe.
because I
I mean,
do.
so I guess it would depend on whether or not you believe that everything, every spirit below is imbued with spark, right? And that there's some redeemable factor in all of them. or whether or not you believe that they don't know that or they're ignorant of it, or that they'll just be wrapped up here when this whole thing ends up in a ball of material. Yeah, I certainly think that karma does come back around, but that's it's all intention and discernment, right? So if they're whether or not karma does ever come back around to them, it's again intention and discernment, right? It's all about whether or not they think it's going to work. And so here's how we break the karmic loop. And even if the karma does come back on them, if they understand that they can be born back into this world over and over and over again, it's the same as on the higher side, realizing that you are immortal. Your body's not, you are, your spirit's immortal.
Mhm.
Can also be immortal on the lower side and just keep coming back over and over and over again. So I mean,
Completely
yeah.
agree. Completely agree. Meaning that
Hmm.
that soul wants no advancement.
Hmm.
That that soul just likes it on this level and doesn't mind doing this over and over and over again. But
Yes.
from my belief system, when we pass, we're shown three different ways that our life lived through our eyes, through how it happened with just local people that we affected, and then
Hmm.
on a universal scale,
Hmm.
how it affected. And then from there, being completely unveiled, watching all of that, we are then able to say, okay, this is what I want to do next. I want to either level up, or I want to learn X, Y, and Z, or I need this experience in order to counterbalance, this experience that I had, etc. And then kind of make the ground rules, if you will, for next time around. I definitely believe that there are people who incarnate knowing they are going to do evil things, atrocities, or even just be a bad person, whether it's to a few local people or, on a grander scale. And they come in knowing that they're going to do that in order to further humanity or be a catalyst for something bigger and for change.
Hmm.
And I do understand the thought process that you're saying, that there are people who make deals, and that definitely happens. We're both magic practitioners, we understand. And but there still are consequences, right? Like for everything you ask for, and this is also why I warn people, be careful what you ask for, not only because you just might get it, but also there are consequences thereof. you
Hmm.
know i, I know this is a rap song, this is probably completely out of left field for most people, but
Music or keys. So,
you know I mean, more money, more problems,
mhm.
right? Everyone wants more money, right? Oh, if only I were a millionaire, right? Life would be so much easier. Yeah, to a point, until taxes come up, until you have everyone at your door that you've ever given, taken a cigarette from, that's all of a sudden hitting you up for money.
Mhm.
And all of a sudden now you have a whole new set of issues. I know a lot of people with a lot of money that are absolutely miserable because
Mhm.
they haven't done the self work and they don't know how. I know people who are very, very poor
Well,
who are happy.
I think that you're absolutely correct there. I mean, yes, those people have money and they are miserable. That's why they do what they do. But I also, and bear this in mind, everything being allegorical, and to no offense to anyone, but take a belief system such as Odinism. Okay, when you die, you're choosing to go to Valhalla, which basically is the same as saying, "Hey, put me in, coach.
Yep.
Let's do this shit again." So, and I think they're aware of that, and why they continue to do it, I don't know. There has to be some sort of answer to that, some sort of mandate, and I'm not in a position to be able to say what that is, one way, shape, form, or the other. But I wanted to touch on one other thing there too. So, you brought up music, and make no mistake that music and comedy are both keys to the divine. A lot of times, people are practicing and they don't even realize that they're practicing. Um, one of the greatest philosophers of the 20th century was a comedian. It was Bill Hicks, and he didn't realize he was a philosopher, but he certainly was, without a doubt. If you have Ghost is named after a Rocky Erickson song, there is so much divine philosophy in Rocky Erickson music, and I know that there's some psychology there as well, but he was doing things that he didn't realize that he was doing in a lot of his music, and you can find that quite often out there. So not all magic is miraculous.
No, and I heard this once and I laughed really hard, but I love it that witchcraft is just spicy psychology.
Yeah, no, it is very
And
much
I
so.
love it, right? Because it's true. A lot of it is. And you have that meme by Johnny Depp, the one with the woman who he goes, "Well, this is just a jar of dirt." And she goes, "Yeah, but did you believe that it was going to solve your problem?" He goes, "Yeah." "Well, did it solve your problem?" "Yeah." "Well, then it's a magical jar of dirt."
Magical jar
Like,
dirt,
what are you
exactly.
complaining about, right?
Hmm.
So, but to go back to your other point that you were saying with it, the believers of Odin and wanting to reincarnate and put me back in, coach, right? To Valhalla, I want to do this again. And you wonder why people would want to do that. I honestly think it comes from a place of they don't know any better.
Hmm. Yeah, it
And
could be.
if you don't know there's anything better to aspire to, I guess you would want to just do this again and again.
And and this is where some of the theurgy stuff might come into play too. So we talked about earlier, everything descends from zero, and and as it goes, it gets lesser. Everything descends from light, and as it gets lesser, and could apply to any of these various different generations of things. You get that in the Bible, generations and numbers and that whole fun thing. It's all built in. Astrology is all built in. We
Oh
live
yeah.
in Saturnian times, and Saturn is the representative of Yahweh, Yaldabaoth, etc. Um, why Saturn and Jupiter clash as well. But the long and short of that is, okay, so everything that is created has some divine spark in it. But what if some of them have such little divine spark? Let's just say that some of these descendants of whatever these things are, were, and continue to be, are so far removed from the divine that the parental factor, the ancestral factor was so small when it comes to sparks that maybe there's nothing left. Maybe there's very little of anything left there to redeem because as it descends, it loses as it goes. I feel like for me, I feel like there's enough evil and ugliness in the world that is identifiable across all spirituality, regardless of what religion anyone is. And we wouldn't all agree on what evil would be, but there are certain things that all of us could agree. No,
Mhm.
that's evil. And we know
Yeah.
it when we see it. We absolutely know it. And I have no other explanation for why that exists other than certain things either have so little spark left in them or no spark left in them that it might explain some of it.
I it makes me really, really sad when you said, you know, something having so little spark left in it.
Hmm.
And I get what you're saying. And I'm not disagreeing with you. And
Yeah.
it makes me sad that something could be so diminished that it's just fighting so hard
Hmm.
to grasp a little bit of light from anywhere that it can, right?
Hmm.
Whether in whatever way, shape, or form that it tries to. And usually when things are in the death throes, right, they're not really looking at protecting the furniture, shall we say.
Hmm.
So they're grasping at anything possible. I do believe that on this plane, especially for us, that good and evil have to exist
Hmm.
because, and I've said this before, unfortunately, human beings do not advance and grow unless we have some adversarial force.
Hmm.
And this is why, and I know this might be controversial to some people are going to hear this and be like, what? But I have had situations where I have had to talk to very, very, very dark entities. And I give them the respect where they're due because that is their job,
Hmm.
right? Like that is what they were literally made for. They were made to be an adversary. They were made to do the nasty stuff. They took on that job. Just like, someone would think of a garbage man, right? Like you and I don't want to go around picking up people's trash all day. But, thankfully, garbage men make really good money doing it, right? They have great benefits. And they made that choice. Not something I'm going to choose, but they signed up on the roster and made that choice.
Hmm.
And it serves a purpose. And if that purpose is a catalyst to help people change, and it typically is, Now, don't get me wrong, you and I, I'm sure, have both seen many people who have gone through adversity and they crumble, whether it's the smallest thing or whether it's, a giant concept thereof. But knowing that there is a divine plan and that these were unleashed within the world to be a catalyst for change. And that also is in the Bible too. I mean, even the book of Job, the whole thing was weird, right? Like God and the devil are teaming up to just like go
Well,
at this poor man
it,
over like a side bet. And
it's
it's sad.
it's interesting to hear your take on that too. And there's another allegory there too, because you and I do fundamentally disagree on that thing, and that's fine, and that's good. Those are the conversations that are worth having.
Yeah.
But the other allegory is that there's room for that, and the entirety of the keys of Solomon that we've talked about a couple times, the entirety of the lower form of Jewish mysticism and Sufi mysticism is based in that exact idea, in the idea, for example, from the Book of Enoch, that once the Nephilim were drowned and killed, that part of them went to Sheol or Hades or Tartarus or whatever you want to call it, but God cut a deal with 10% of them to let them become the land spirits and the demons of the world. Demons don't come from dead people or from angels. They're in that belief, they're the Nephilim, and they're here to challenge people because God thought it would be whatever God thought it would be, entertaining and or useful, for them to be here to do that in order to hopefully drive people to the Word of God. So that's an interesting allegorical connection there.
That is. It is. And when I talk about my belief system in it, it's
Mhm.
hard because then you run up across some people who will say, well, then if I make the choice to be evil, I've made that choice, and therefore I should take no karmic consequences for it because it's all divinely planned. And that's when we get in the whole like there's the free will though, right? Like you made your choice, and there are some choices that are open. I do believe in certain things being predestined.
Hmm.
I do believe that we come in and, all you have to know is a little bit of palmistry, even to know this. We all come in and we have certain things that we have to do. We might have multiple choices as to how we're going to get that done,
Yeah.
right? But like in the end, certain things have to be checked off the list that we have to get done. And, we get to have some creative license how we get there. But in the end, that's our responsibility in this lifetime.
Hmm.
Now, when it comes to, bad things happening to good people, some of it could be just predestined. Some of it also could be it's for that person's best growth. But how that person grows through that, right, really speaks volumes to them.
Hmm.
But then there's this other part where people will say, oh, well, then if I'm in a bad situation or whatever, I should just do absolutely nothing because it's predestined and, F it. Right.
Hmm.
And that's the part that I'm like, no, this is where it's this big sliding scale where we have to step back and look at things in a more universal mind space.
Hmm.
Everyone wants to look at everything on this tiny micro, it's my life, what's happening to me, what this means to me. And don't get me wrong, right? Like that's the majority of the way how we look at things, just
Hmm.
because that's how the human brain works. But if we back up even a couple steps, right? Just like that old song Bette Midler used to sing, God is watching us and everything looks great from up above, right? But down here, it's like, hey, there's a lot going on. We could use some help. So it definitely depends on what perspective you're looking at. And if you're looking at this from, your higher self, right? And you're looking at your life right now and your choices, are you going to try and course correct certain things because it's for this level's highest good, or do you just hands off leave it alone? And I believe there's a bit of both. And that's why I also believe in reaching out to our higher selves and talking and saying, hey, having those communications, is this for my highest good? And sometimes you're going to be shocked that the answer is yes. And it's not the choice you would normally make, right? And I know I've had it several times in my life where I'm like, are you sure? And I keep getting, you need to go through this. And I go through it. And then when I'm on the other end, because it's always hard to get perspective when you're knee deep in it, right? But when you're on the other end of the lake, looking back, you go, wow, I would not be who I am today if I hadn't gone through all that in order to get here. I wouldn't have the integrity that I have, or the loyalty, or the worldview that I have, or the love, compassion, empathy that I have, etc.
Mhm.
Right? For some people that say, well, I wouldn't have all the anger issues or bad knees or whatever it is, right? But all of that leads to a bigger picture of growth. And I knew one person. This person was just, uh, God bless him, it just a dumpster fire of a human being. Okay, that's the best way I can put it. Everything that they could do wrong, they did wrong, and then some. They were a hot mess. Um, just created absolute havoc and wreckage in pretty much everyone's life that they ever touched in some shape or form. But deep down, you knew that they were a really good person. It's almost like they couldn't help themselves, right? And I remember it had this whole situation with this person, and I went into heavy meditation, aka prayer, whatever you want to call it. It's kind of all similar to me. And I talked to this person's higher self to basically say, like, all of us want to help you to change, but you can't help yourself to save your own life. And their higher self said, this is what we came here for, though. And you know what? When they died, and I was at the funeral, I actually got up and spoke at the funeral because very few people were going to. And I thought, that's not right. And I got up and I spoke, and I made a joke about it, of how we're all here because in some capacity we love this person, even though it was really, really, really hard to do. And everyone started laughing. And I said, but we're all better off because we knew that person.
Mhm.
Whether it's we're going to make better decisions as a result, or we're going to be more discerning who we let into our lives or around us. But I truly believe that there is a reason for everything. And it's just
Mhm.
a perceptional shift, right? Of of looking at it. And it doesn't mean everything's okay and we should just let horrible things happen. We still have responsibility and accountability for our own actions and trying to help other things. But I almost feel sometimes giving it up to, well, demon's gonna demon, and light's gonna light, is almost a little bit of a cop out.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I don't disagree with you. I think that there's room for all of that to be in there. I think that for the most part, what you're saying to me absolutely rings true. But I do think that there are those extreme elements on both sides. But more importantly, the thing that you're discussing there is exactly what alchemical spirituality is, and it can be on the higher or the lower end. So, you take a whiskey, for example, it actually is exposed to fire three times. The first time is to degrade the raw material, and if you mess that up, you'll never make spirit. You'll only make vinegar. And the second time is to separate the gross uh, from the subtle, and then the third time is to perfect that. But on this realm, in this world, the one thing that I do firmly believe is that we cannot be made perfect, and we're not promised that we'll be made perfect in this realm, in this world, but we're promised that we can be made whole in this realm, in this world. But you have to divide the salt from the mercury, etc., before it comes back together. So I do very much believe that.
And it's beautiful that you brought that up, because the alchemical process, I feel like a lot of people, especially in like popular culture right now, right? It's very easy to say, oh, it's all an initiatory process, and we want the answers now. It's like you're not even able to conceptualize the answer, even if it was broadcast to you directly, because you haven't done the work and gone through the process.
There are people who distill for a living every day. I would say 99.9% of them have no idea that what they're doing is an initiatory process into what I do and who I am. They don't understand that, and they're never going to see it. They don't look at it that way. And that's because they come at it from one of two areas. either 100% ego, and there is room for ego, or they come at it from the new religion of science, but they certainly don't come at it from the true spirituality of alchemy.
And this is the part that saddens me because they've become these separate camps.
Hmm.
I mean, everything that I've said today, there's science involved with it. So there's the physical, right? And there's
Hmm.
the spiritual, and then there's the macro universal.
Hmm.
Why can't it be all three?
It
As
can be, and it is
you're
if it's
doing it.
unified. Yeah, if it's unified, it can be. It's just it's egos and people not doing shadow work and not they can't step out of themselves in that way. But I wanted to and you may be aware of this, but I wanted to read this anyways because I mentioned Bill Hicks a while ago. So
Yeah.
uh Bill Hicks is one of my favorite comedians, and the beautiful thing about Bill Hicks, he died very young. He died when he was 32, 33
Oh,
of pancreatic cancer. Very much in the same sort of category, a little more tame than Sam Kinison, but he and Sam Kinison were very close friends. Uh, but Bill could teeter back and forth from losing it on the audience to giving them a beautiful gift as he was speaking. And one of his most famous quotes, and it's a little bit long, but I think it's a good way to sort of kind of bring us towards the end of our conversation here. So the world is like a ride in an amusement park, and when you choose to go on it, you think it's real because that's how powerful our minds are. The ride goes up and down, around and around. It has thrills and chills, and it's very brightly colored, and it's very loud, and it's fun for a while. Many people have been on the ride a long time and they begin to wonder, hey, is this real or is this just a ride? And other people have remembered and they come back to us and they say, hey, don't worry, don't be afraid ever because this is just a ride. And we kill those people. Shut him up. I've got a lot invested in this ride. Shut him up. Look at my furrows of worry. Look at my big bank account and my family. This has to be real. It's just a ride. But we always kill the good guys who try to tell us that. You ever notice that? And let the demons run amok, but it doesn't matter because it's just a ride. And we can change it at any time we want. It's only a choice, no effort, no work, no job, no savings or money. Just a simple choice right now between fear and love. The eyes of fear want you to put bigger locks on your doors, buy guns, close yourself off. The eyes of love instead see all of us as one. Here's what we can do right now to change it to a better ride. Take all that money we spend on weapons and defenses each year and instead spend it feeding, clothing, and educating the poor of the world, which it would pay for many times over, not one human being excluded, and we could explore space together, both inner and outer, forever in peace.
that was
So,
beautiful.
yeah, that's astronausticism.
Look at me getting a new name.
Right?
Well,
So,
Alan, it's been absolutely wonderful. I feel like I have so much more still to go.
well, we
But
have more
one
work to do together. You and I
we
definitely have more work to do
oh
together.
yeah. Yes. One thing I wanted to bring up, and this is going to be like a little bit of kind of a closing side note, is in a lot of the Gnostic Gospels, there's something that comes up a lot called the Gnostic bride and bridegroom, right? With the text. And it's very misunderstood. A lot of people think it's about actual sex, and it's not. It's about the divine feminine, the divine masculine
It's
within
the
all of us.
syzygies.
Right.
Mhm.
And intertwining those two. And the reason I wanted to bring this up is because when I knew I was doing an uphill battle of recording these three major episodes, um, episodes 2 and 3, obviously you and Chucky Danger. And when that came along, there was almost a part of me that was like, why do I need to record with somebody else? And this part kept coming up. And so I really appreciate you helping me being a male counterpart in this to balance out. And not only that, also because we do have some differing ideas,
Mhm.
but overall in the whole, it's very much similar and the same. And I find it
Yeah.
absolutely beautiful. And we definitely have way more to discuss. And some of the things that we're going to talk about in the future, I think, are going to be huge. And I really look forward to it. And I thank you so incredibly much for your time.
Absolutely. Well, and thank you for having me. And just to touch on that Gnostic bride and bridegroom thing real quickly, to put it in perspective, that realm of forms and realm of ideas, for both you and I, this worked in this conversation, but for people to understand, if you've ever heard the phrase "to temper passion with reason," that's the Gnostic bride and bridegroom. Those two opposing forces, and you have to have them together to make something work.
Absolutely beautiful. I love it.
Mhm.
Alan, everyone can find you on If You Have Ghosts, You Have Everything podcast. I know when I post these on socials, I'll be posting to uh, both your podcast as well as the Alchemist Cabinet
Mhm.
as well for you. And, for everyone, if you haven't listened to the shows, I will have them also in the notes as well for the three specific shows that I think really highlight not only what we've talked about in here, but also the most recent one that Alan did about his personal beliefs. And thank you, everyone, so much for listening. I hope you got out of this what you needed. And if anything, I hope it at least made you think.
Amen.
For you lovely beings who figured there's still more time, what's going on? I wanted to do a short addendum because I feel like there was so much information in these three episodes that I don't want to leave anyone high and dry, feeling like they don't fully understand the message that I was trying to convey. In episode one, I was really trying to explain that we coexist with beings on other planes, and not all of them hate us or want to control us. And a lot of them really want to coexist with us and lift us up. And yeah, they act a little funny once in a while, but that's what it is. And also that so many things have been called so many different names over time that it gets really convoluted when you start looking into this stuff to figure out who's good, who's bad, and who has what agenda, when in reality, they're all kind of the same thing. You can just call them different names. It's just like people. We're all people, but we come from different places. We look different ways. And in episode two, I really wanted to talk about a time in which we coexisted with beings in one plane, and how scientifically that could be that we are coming into the time again where we are all going to be coexisting. And that's why there's so many peep throughs, and why it's so important to take stock of your physical body as well as your mental and emotional and spiritual bodies, and understand that this has happened before. We're part of a giant cycle. And some of the ancient writings we have told us what that was like before. So, in order to take heed and understand what's going to happen, sometimes you have to look at the past. Now, episode three was kind of a hodgepodge, but it really got into the different beliefs. And so, a couple points I wanted to make is that there was a time in which we coexisted with beings on one plane. We had different frequencies, but we could all see each other and communicate. And that was lost over time when there were beings who wanted to sow, divide, and conquer us. So, why bring all this up now? Why am I doing all these episodes and burning myself out for all of this? It's because disclosure is happening. And perhaps for some of you, it's not happening fast enough. But for others of you, this information is brand new and it's rife with issues because it challenges a lot of your belief systems. It challenges a lot of your understanding of how the world works. And it also is, for some of you, challenging your religious or spiritual beliefs and how you or human beings place among the world or the stars or whatever you compared it to before is changing. So if you think about science and governments, if they were to state with absolute clarity there are higher dimensional beings who are able to influence and manipulate humans, and that sometimes they can be seen and other times they appear maybe as voices in somebody's head or a weird drive in order to do something that the person doesn't really quite know why. Think about what that would do to society as a whole. Many religions would begin fighting about their God versus the rest. I mean, that's happening right now. And then some are going to question religion altogether as a manipulation tactic, which you all should be. And that would absolutely devastate some people to the core who have lived their entire life upholding their religious beliefs. And then they have to now think about they've lived their entire lives to make this deity, quote unquote, happy, only to find out it was a game. Then you have the mental health structure, which would absolutely crumble, right? Because now you have anybody who's seen or heard something strange would, stop taking medication and instantly say, like, I told you they were real. That could lead to lawsuits up the wazoo. That would lead to just absolute pandemonium because there are a lot of people who do need medication and there are other, factors going on. Not everything is always a spiritual attack. We have physical bodies and sometimes they get wonky. And lastly, and most importantly, the stability for pretty much everything would crumble because people feel that they have no power. And if the government has no power, what's the point of going to work or doing absolutely anything? Because we don't really know if it's out of our own free will at this point, right? So it would literally challenge everyone's beliefs down to the core. And as many of you out there who understand or believe that there is something more than just us, whether it's off planet, in this planet, spiritual, physical, eh, call it what you will, that's great, but there's a lot of people who don't. They don't think about this. It's not part of their purview. And so I always want to leave you in every episode that I do with what you can do because I feel that it's extremely important to be self empowered, right? And not feel helpless because things are going to happen at their own time. And honestly, there's not a whole heck of a lot that you and I can do to forward that. So, what can you do? You can know yourself. You can do the work that needs to be done in order to know who you are intrinsically and to build up your own character, to do your shadow work, to make sure that you are acknowledging all parts of yourself and healing or getting rid of whatever needs to go, what no longer serves you, and honoring those parts of you that maybe you've put in the background because you didn't even think that they were positive traits, not understanding that you don't have to live by someone else's thought process of what you should be. So, knowing yourself is first and foremost, healing yourself, growing yourself. And then you're going to take back your own power. And from there, you're going to fight fear. Okay. And after that, keep growing spiritually, enhance your gifts, and learn discernment. It is a huge, huge lesson to learn discernment. And first and foremost, and intrinsically within all of these things that I've mentioned, heal. Heal yourself, and that allows you to heal the world around you and heal all the other people that love you and look at you as some semblance of order in a very, very weird world.